Hello again, this is Ian with Learning Experiences in Applied Fields. For our first video on web development, we will be discussing some terminology and sorting out all of the different technologies associated with the web. Due to the nature of this information, this video might be a bit bland, but it's very important, so I'll try to keep it short and somewhat interesting. The first thing we'll discuss is the browser. This is the interface between the user and the web. The most common of these are Microsoft's Internet Explorer, Apple's Safari, Google's Chrome, and Mozilla's Firefox. There are others, but these are the ones that will be most important to us because as web developers, these are the ones that we must support because they're most commonly used. You will notice in these videos that I almost exclusively use Google Chrome. There are many reasons for this, but just understand that they are all mostly interchangeable and they're all called browsers. The next thing to discuss is the server. The server is where the web page is stored. The browser is asking the server for a page, and the server is presenting it. The easiest way to think about the internet might be as an analogy to Halloween trick-or-treat. This is a little bit weird, but bear with me. Each user on their browser is like a child going trick-or-treating. Each server is a house, and the web pages are candy. The magic of web development is giving the trick-or-treaters personalized candy. Otherwise, everybody would just give out chocolate chips, and nobody wants to go trick-or-treating just to get a whole bag of chocolate chips. That brings us to HTML to start with. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, but you'll never need to know that. What you will need to know is that HTML is where we define all of the content of the website. HTML decides what the website says. Back to the Halloween analogy, the HTML is what ingredients go into the candy. Originally, that was all a website was. It was simple markup language displaying text. This would be fine, but people wanted to change the way it looked. Rather than just throwing ingredients in a bag, we now want to give web pages form and decoration, styling, if you will. That brings us right to cascading style sheets, which we'll refer to as CSS. CSS allows us to change how the HTML content gets displayed. CSS is how we tell the browser that text is read in 10-point font. CSS tells the browser how big the borders are or what color the background is. Think of it as food coloring in the mold that the candy is poured in. All Skittles taste the same, but different colors look very different. As a side note, don't post comments that you swear you can taste the difference. You're either a troll or a freak of nature, and either way, just stay out of my way. I can make 10 websites that all say the exact same thing, but they all look very different. This is what CSS is all about. With HTML and CSS alone, we could make some awesome websites. That's really all you need for displaying static content. And though this is great, sometimes you want more. You want to be smart. Now we want to give different candy to different kids. You want something to change in the content or the styling depending on some other variable, like who accessed the site or at what time or what button they pressed. This stuff can be done with PHP most commonly. PHP is actually a recursive backronym for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. It's a full-blown code language used for changing the HTML based on anything. The important thing to know about PHP is that it is server-side scripting. That means the server runs the PHP before giving the content to the browser. The browser never sees the PHP, and the information is delivered just like plain HTML. In some cases, it is preferable to have the code run on the client side, and this means that the browser executes the code. For this purpose, we would use JavaScript, which is very similar to PHP, but a different language, and it's running on the other side. One thing to understand is that JavaScript and Java are not the same thing. I won't go into this now, but just remember I said that. We'll leave it right now at saying that JavaScript is a client-side scripting language that we probably won't use for quite a while, but we'll come back to it later. What we have so far is HTML for our content, CSS for our styling, PHP for server-side scripting, and JavaScript for client-side scripting. HTML and CSS are always the main part of web development. When to use PHP and when to use JavaScript, that'll all be covered in a separate video. This decision between client-side and server-side, or even to use scripting at all, is very important, but it's far beyond the scope of what we're doing here. Occasionally, we want a way to store and retrieve information during web development. There is a database system that we use for this purpose. MySQL database is a database implementation capable of storing and providing data to the website scripts like PHP. Think of this like a filing cabinet where we can stash data for later retrieval. MySQL becomes especially important when working with a website that employs a CMS, or content management system. This is a system that makes it very easy to build sites with often updated dynamic content, like blogs. The site is written to display the content in the way you want, but the actual content itself is stored and recalled from a database. Don't worry too much about MySQL or CMS systems right now. We'll talk about those in a lot more detail later. You'll also hear people talking about WordPress. That's a CMS and also something we'll deal with later. At this point, we've covered most of the technology involved in web development. There are others, but we can ignore those for a while, especially as far as the code languages go. They're not important while you're first getting started. There are a couple other acronyms to be aware of, though, because they'll show up as we move forward. They aren't things you will mess with much, but it helps to know what they are. DNS stands for Domain Name System. This is a complex system that connects domain names like leafteam.org to the IP address of their servers. As web developers, this is a system that we use but don't really modify. You have to configure a domain name to point to a server, but beyond that, we let other people deal with the inner workings of the DNS. More about configuring DNS will come pretty early in the video series, but not right now. I mentioned IP addresses a moment ago. IP is another one to know. It stands for Internet Protocol, and all that you need to know about it is that it's exactly like the address of your house. The IP address allows computers to go find each other. I have covered a ton of material very quickly in this video. Do not hesitate to go back and watch it again, and don't hesitate to pause me every few minutes while you grasp what it is I'm saying here. It's a large quantity of information, but it isn't very complicated. Work to digest this one thing at a time, and it'll come quickly. Once we start using these technologies, it'll all make a lot more sense. That's it for this video. In the next video, I'll be talking about the tools used in web development. I will walk you through setting up a development environment and show you which tools I use for specific jobs. Please leave comments below and let me know what you like and what you don't like and what you would like to see in future videos. Also, make sure you head over to leafteam.org and check us out. That's all for this week. Cheers.